Graphic audio. A movie in your mind.
Oracle, personal. Entry number 1. No Man's Land. Day 1. This is harder than I thought it would be. This is me breaking the silence and telling the secrets. I wish there were another way to do this, and I pray that you'll never read these words, and the many words sure to follow. But someone has to keep the chronicle. Someone has to record and remember, and the only person left who can do it is me. The problem is, to tell it right, I can't hold anything back. Not for myself, not for him, not for any of us. No half-truths, no dodges, no feints, not even the parts that will hurt. This, as they say, is the proverbial it. All or nothing. For us, like it is for Gotham. It means I have to strip the masks away. It means I have to betray secrets shared in confidence or learn through treachery. It means nothing is sacred. I'm trying very hard not to think about what might come, how you'll react if you ever do read these words. I'm trying very hard not to think about your righteous anger, or about how you'll curse me for keeping so much from you for so long. I'm trying very hard not to think about the proud man you are, and how humiliated you'll feel. I know you as you know me, Commissioner. You'll think you were played for a fool. But Dad, you've never been a fool. Never to me. Never to him. I really, really, really hope that no one else will ever read this but me. Because if you're reading this, it means we lost. It means Gotham City really and truly is dead. And probably me along with it. My name was Batgirl once. Now I'm called Oracle. But as you know, my name is really Barbara Gordon. First mask removed. I had to get that out of the way up front, because you have to understand my bona fides, such as they are. You have to believe that I know what I'm talking about, that when I say such and such happened, or Batman and Joker did this or that, I'm reporting the facts, as best I can. When I say that I know what's going on, you must trust that I am telling you the truth, all of it. You must believe that you can believe me. As Batgirl, I learned Gotham City like the back of my gloved hand. The Gotham that Fodor's doesn't write about. The Gotham that lives between criminal madness and ultimate despair. I know things. For example, I know that the sewer grate on the north side of the intersection at Middow and Cohen is a false one, not on any city record, installed by a certain vigilante to allow for immediate access to a cache of equipment. I know, too, that if you dive off what was once the Babylon Towers with a good cable and perfect aim, you can loop your throw around the statue of the Zion Lion 30 feet below, the one that sits atop the GCBC building. If you do it right, your arms will feel like they're leaving their sockets the hard way. But if you keep your grip and your nerve, you can swing all the way to the penthouse apartments overlooking Victory Square. I know that if you do it wrong, you'll hit the ground so hard they'll need a sponge to get you out of your costume. I know that if you do this at 23:37 hours Monday through Friday, you can clear the next 3 rooftops in time to land atop the J Street L as it slows to turn up Broadway. On Saturdays, you've got to do it 3 minutes earlier. Or at least, you could before the cataclysm. As Oracle, my knowledge is even greater, though perhaps more abstract. Given time and a computer or 6, I can find just about any piece of information stored in any electronic system anywhere on the planet, provided I can hack my way in. And I can hack my way in like I designed the code myself. Usually. More than that, I've got records like you wouldn't believe from places you wouldn't imagine. Scanned documents from 200 years ago up to the latest burn of the complete Who's Who CD. I know how to research and I know how to investigate. I read back over this so far, and I realize that though those 2 alter egos may be me at my best, Barbara Gordon is the woman at its heart. She's the most important part of this, in a way. She is, after all, the girl who was raised in Gotham City. The girl who sneers at New Yorkers who talk about their tough town. She's the girl who tells the Metropolis jokes. Me. As much Gotham City as anyone, in a way. As much as you, Dad. As much as any of your cops. As much as Batman himself. I'm looking out the window now, which is not really a window at all. I'm not in my apartment. Not exactly. I'm through the secret door in the wall where you normally hang your coat. In my control room. My command post. This is where Oracle lives. I'm surrounded by monitors and mini towers, computers running on battery power charged by the solar cells I've stockpiled. I've got a satellite phone with a T3 connection and uplink. I've got flashlights and rope, even a couple of non-lethal weapons. A tonfa, a sawed-down baseball bat, a collapsible baton, and one rifle, in case things get really nasty. I've got 2 portable heaters and a blanket, and I'm using all 3, and I'm still freezing my ass off. I'm looking at the worst winter in Gotham City's history, and it's not the weather that did it, or even Mother Nature. I can see the flashes of light as the charges go off, demolishing the Brown Bridge, cutting off this island city from the rest of the United States of America. As of exactly 7 minutes ago, we're no longer citizens of the USA. As of exactly 7 minutes ago, Gotham City officially became a no man's land. Everyone who could go has. As for the rest of us, now we couldn't leave even if we wanted to. How did we come to this? They were asking the same question on the late-night news shows. They recounted the contagion that devastated the city 3 years ago. Then the second outbreak that picked up where the first one had left off. They talked about how tens of thousands of Gothamites died, about the repeated impositions of martial law. They talked about the eroding economic, social, and cultural bases as people fled this city for greener pastures, relocating to Bloodhaven or Boston or Metropolis or, God forbid, Hub City. Gotham, they all sadly admitted, was pretty much a write-off even before the cataclysm. Oh, and how they love to talk about the cataclysm, Dad.
We're looking at the ruins of once mighty Gotham City, where a record 7.6 Richter scale earthquake, with an epicenter not 10 miles from downtown, with fires burning for days afterwards, has resulted in massive loss of life.
As far as tragedies go, let's be honest, the media couldn't have asked for better. Gotham City was front-page news around the world. Put all the tragedies together, one after the other, and we've got a death toll in the hundreds of thousands easy. I'm looking out the window and I want to laugh, because the cataclysm, that was just adding insult to injury. What happened next, when you think about it in that light, wasn't so hard to believe. I mean, after Mother Nature, there was really only one thing worse that could happen to our fair city. Politics.
Mr. Speaker, our nation can no longer afford to throw good money after bad.
No money for Gotham, said Congress. No money for Gotham, said the Senate. Federal funds in excess of $100 billion would be needed to rebuild the civic infrastructure. That was the soundbite. And then the number climbed higher. Not 100, 120. Not 120, 150. We became the nation's latest scapegoat, and in a way, wasn't it about time? We're the murder capital of the country, or at least we used to be when we were part of the country. According to the FBI, and I know this, trust me, we outscored every other city in the nation with our stats. Highest incidence of crimes against property per capita? Gotham City. Highest incidence of robbery homicide per capita? Gotham City. Assaults? Gotham City. Rapes? Gotham City. Kidnapping, arson, hell, even auto theft? Gotham City. If that wasn't enough, and for the politicos it wasn't, next came the parade of lunatics. Two-Face and Mr. Freeze, Ivy and Clayface, the Riddler, the Penguin, and, of course, their favorite madman, the son of a bitch who put a bullet through my spine, who put me in this wheelchair for the rest of my life. The Joker. Where the politicians went, the nation followed. Gotham City, the new Sodom. Let it burn, let it rot, let it crumble. Even our favorite son, Bruce Wayne, couldn't save us from the might of Washington. The billionaire playboy, the inheritor of the Wayne fortune, the wayward president of Wayne Enterprises, Wayne Technologies, and Wayne Development. Even with the billions of dollars from the companies bearing his name that Wayne poured into both cities at once, Gotham and DC, he couldn't stop it.
In an historic measure and with profound regret, the President today signed into law the federal declaration of Gotham City as no man's land.
And speaking of Bruce Wayne, here comes another mask removed. The big one. Brace yourself, Dad. Bruce Wayne is the Batman. Seriously. But Bruce Wayne seems to have vanished, and the Batman with him. I suppose that shouldn't mean anything. So many don't even believe he exists. But this time, it feels different. It feels like maybe he really is gone. That maybe Batman and Bruce Wayne both have done the sensible thing, the sane thing. Maybe they got out while they could. I don't want to believe it. Gotham City needs him now as much as he has ever needed Gotham City. I don't want to believe he's abandoned us. But he hasn't been seen in days. I should have heard something by now. I would have heard something by now. For the first time since as long as I can remember, there is no Batman. And I'm scared, Dad. I'm really scared.
Graphic Audio presents DC Comics Batman No Man's Land Part 1 by Greg Rucka. Batman and all names, characters, and elements are trademarks of DC Comics. Copyright 2011. All rights reserved. Narrated by Richard Rowan and Karen Novak. With performances by James Konachek, Julianne Elliott, Thomas Keegan, Danny Gavigan, Yasmin Twazon, Greg Gorton, Susan Linsky, Terrence Aselford, Nanette Savard, Scott McCormick, Alyssa Wilmoth, Nick DePinto, Drew Kopus, Michael Glenn, David Coyne, James Lewis, Alexander Strain, Thomas Penny, Joseph Thornhill, James Keegan, Christopher Sheeran, Kimberly Gilbert, Daniel Sontag, Faith Potts, Joe Brack, Ken Jackson, MJ Casey, Liz Demery, and Bradley Smith. Six of them stood on the sunken roof of the GCPD's Central Precinct, almost in a perfect line, just shy of the edge. All faced west toward the Gotham River, and with the height of the precinct building and the rest of the shattered skyline before them, their view was almost entirely unobstructed. In the distance, shrouded in the thin mist that rose from the water, helicopters flew low along the far shore, halogen beams drawing white lines through the air. Behind them, on its mount, sat the broken floodlight that could paint the clouds with the silhouette of a giant bat. It was brittle cold, the middle of winter, but there had been no snow yet, not even at Christmas. The air was dry and the wind was strong and from the north, and it made the condensation from their breathing look more like smoke than steam, whipped away as quickly as it was exhaled. All had learned to breathe through their mouths, trying to minimize the assault of scent from the traumatized city. The rotten food, the sewage, the smoke. They stood quietly waiting, each with their own thoughts, hands thrust deep into pockets or folded under armpits, shifting from foot to foot in an attempt to stay warm. At 11:50 exactly, the man on the end, the one dressed in tactical gear and wearing a black ball cap with a GCPD badge stitched to its face, consulted his watch.
10 minutes, Jim.
James Gordon stood at the center of the line, his wife's hand in his own.
Thank you, Bill.
They could see, somewhere across the river, in the massive floodlights camped on the far shore, ant-sized soldiers in toy-sized trucks burst into a sudden frenzy of movement.
By declaration of the President,
The amplified voice drifted across the water. None of them could make out the words, but all knew what was being said. Gordon tightened his grip on his wife's hand, not so much to reassure her as to keep himself in check. In his mid-50s, with hair now more gray than brown, and a face that had lines etched from 1,000 different crime scenes, he had been a police all of his adult life since leaving the Marine Corps. His career had started in Chicago, a young rookie on a rough force, but just over 10 years ago he had moved to Gotham City, a new lieutenant in a department wallowing gleefully in its own corruption. It was, and he knew this, the single most important decision of his life. Looking out at the city now, he found himself remembering the city then. He had arrived and almost immediately hated the new job, hated the people he was forced to work with even more. He had hated the crime and apathy and desperation that seemed stamped on every street of his new home. He had hated the arrogance of the public servants who had turned their backs on the people. But Gordon had fallen immediately in love with Gotham herself, with the vibrancy of the city, with its character and its history. Gotham was an American city, with streets full of people of every color, stores that catered to every culture. Gotham had a pulse, a heartbeat, a soul. Gotham had glamour and sass, but the brassiness of a longshoreman beneath it all. Gordon loved it. Within days of his arrival, he'd known he would never leave. Indeed, that he could not. He'd known that Gotham was to be his city. He'd known he would serve her, come what may. Within a year, Gordon had made captain and overseen the purging of one of the most corrupt police forces in the nation's history. He had made new enemies and new allies, and all but destroyed his first marriage. He had met Sarah Essen, the woman whose hand was even now his anchor, and Harvey Dent, the friend who too soon became a foe. But if those were all important vital elements contributing to who he was now, there was one other. His first year in Gotham had been the first year of the Batman as well. Sarah gave his hand a squeeze, almost reflexive reassurance, jerking Gordon back from the past. He looked away from the National Guard encampment on the far shore, at the miles of razor wire and tank barricades that had been assembled across the already mined river, to look at her. 12 years his junior, twice as pretty as when they'd first met. Looking at her, he could feel his heartbeat just a little faster. For a moment, the temptation to bury his face in her hair, to hide in the familiar feel of her skin, was overpowering. But it wouldn't do, and he knew that. Not in front of his people, certainly. They were looking to him for leadership and strength, and after all, he was still the commissioner of police, at least for another 7 minutes or so. His people. It almost made him smile as he looked at the line on either side of him, at those cops who, like himself, had decided to stay behind for one reason or another. At the far end of the line was Renee Montoya, Detective Third Class, and the only other woman in the rooftop group aside from Sarah. Born and raised in Gotham, the child of Dominican immigrants, Montoya was one of the best on his force, and he had a paternal pride in her. He had promoted her himself, overseen her assignments and training. At times, he felt as fond of Renee Montoya as he did of his own daughter, Barbara. Standing beside Montoya was her partner, Detective Sergeant Harvey Bullock. Sarah liked to call him the Bulldog. Never when Harvey could hear, of course. And Gordon thought that it was more than just an apt physical description of the overweight cop. There was nobody more stubborn, nobody more tenacious, nobody more potentially offensive in the whole of the GCPD than Bullock. Then, Sarah Essen, lieutenant. Their marriage had seen more rocks dug up than a quarry, and there were times when Gordon wondered if they kept returning to each other simply because no one else would have them. She was more than his wife, and more than his friend, and more than his lover. Sarah was his equal. How could he not love her most of all for that? That was on his left. On his right were the remaining two of the GCPD hierarchy. Hugh Foley was the latest addition to the GCPD Officer Corps. A lieutenant and vice bunco, Gordon knew Foley as a competent administrator. good with the public and the media. Quiet in the ranks, one of the many men under Gordon's command, hardly distinguishable from so many of the others. Looking at him now, Gordon had to admit he had no idea why Foley had decided to stay behind with the rest of them. At the end of the line stood Captain William Pettit, head of the GCPD Quick Response Team, binoculars in one hand, watch in the other. Another former soldier, Pettit had served in Gotham's own war for several years now, responsible for training and commanding a unit where hostage takings and shootouts were only 24 hours apart on a good day. As far as tactical support, Gordon couldn't think of anyone better.
5 minutes. Suppose it's too late to change our minds about this. Not if you run for it. If you sprint...
You might make it as far as Brady Avenue before the charges start going off. Go for it, Foley.
Quiet.
Sarah gave his hand another squeeze. The problem, as far as Helena Bertinelli was concerned, was with her watch. It was a good watch, and she knew that. A Rolex, shock-resistant and waterproof and accurate like you wouldn't believe. That wasn't the problem. It was that she had to wear the damn thing on her wrist, even when she was in costume, even when she was the Huntress. There was just no other accessible place to put it where she could reach it in a hurry. In a pouch on her belt, for instance, would require both having a free hand and the time to reach it. So it stayed on her wrist, below the launcher on her forearm that fired razor-sharp spikes with a blast of compressed air. And she had long ago resigned herself to all the problems that created. Helena couldn't even count how many times she had had to have the watch crystal repaired, not to mention the pain that came from blocking a punch with a lump of metal wrapped around your wrist. The Batman, she was certain, did not wear a watch to work. No, he had some fancy heads-up display in that Kevlar-lined cowl of his, something that kept perfect time, tied to the atomic clock in Colorado, and that was visible day or night but never obscured his vision. All Helena had behind the domino mask she wore as the Huntress were third-generation starlight lenses, and they only worked half the time. The Batman didn't have any of these problems. The Batman had all of the cool equipment and all the training to use it. And what the Batman had, he shared only with a chosen few, and long ago he had made it clear that Helena Bertinelli was not one of those. Sure, they were both vigilantes in a city where crime was as common as cars, but as far as he was concerned, the similarities ended there. She wasn't Robin, and she wasn't Nightwing, and she wasn't welcome in the club. And that, it seemed, was that. He had laid it all out for her once, almost 2 years before, when she had been crouching on the roof of a warehouse overlooking Miller Harbor. Surveillance on a group of mafia soldiers getting ready to move some heroin off the docks. She hadn't even known he was there until he'd spoken, making her jump half out of her costume.
Huntress.
Then he looked pointedly at the crossbow she was holding.
I've got this. I don't need your help.
No one dies tonight.
Just like that. Just like he was laying down the law. It made her angry suddenly, the judgment in his voice, the command.
Unlike you, I shoot back.
That's the problem.
Don't do that! Don't walk away from me!
She'd gotten to her feet without thinking, blowing the hiding place, blowing the hours of surveillance.
I've been out here every night for a year. We do the same thing. How dare you presume to judge me?
The movement had been so quick she hadn't even seen it. The blur of cape so fast, it might have been a shadow. And then the crossbow was out of her hand, and he had tossed it across the rooftop, not bothering to look. Now he was face to face with her. It was the first time she'd been that close to him, been able to see that there truly was a man beneath the cowl. His jaw was strong, and his lips thin.
You kill.
She'd surprised herself by finding her voice.
Yes.
Not in my city.
Is that why you don't like me? That when some four-time loser with murder on his mind pulls a gun on me, I'm not afraid to drop him? Is that it?
Yes.
That's not what this is about.
That's all that this is about.
His tone had stunned her, and once again she could imagine the man beneath the cowl. But before she'd been able to respond, he'd already turned, and then was gone, dropping off the roof. She had known better than to try to follow him, and that had been that for a while. Until only a year ago, when the Malfatti thing had come up and she'd found herself sharing the case with the Batman's protege, Nightwing. They had ended up teaming together by accident more than anything else. Nightwing coming up from his usual beat of Bloodhaven, 60 miles south of Gotham, to cover for the Batman, who was mysteriously out of town on business. Before she'd known what had happened, they were sharing clues and facts. Then, they'd shared her bed. After the case was done, she'd told herself it was a one-time thing. They had both been alone in Gotham, and it was a thrill and a comfort, and nothing more. Certainly, Nightwing had tried to be a gentleman about the brief affair, which in its own way was pretty funny. He'd refused to even let slip his real name, which she had teased him about mercilessly. There they'd been, for God's sake, masks as off as they could get, and still he tried to protect his identity. She knew why. She knew it wasn't for him. It was for the Batman, whoever he really was. Nightwing would rather die than betray that confidence. She hadn't pressed. She respected that. Still, she found herself thinking about Nightwing more often than she'd ever thought she would. Even now, she wondered where he was. She realized she'd been staring at her watch for over a minute now, not registering what the hands were telling her.
5 to midnight.
5 minutes until Gotham City became persona non grata to the rest of the US of A. Just like her. She smiled despite herself. It wasn't strictly analogous, she knew that, but she felt a perverse camaraderie with Gotham suddenly. They were both alone, they were both unwanted, and both would fight on against the odds. She wrapped her cape around herself a little tighter, trying to stay warm, then leaned back into the shadows.
Not in his city.
She checked her watch again.
Well, that's not his city any longer.
She touched the cross at her throat, the one part of her costume as the Huntress that carried over into the life of Helena Bertinelli. She said a silent and quick Our Father, and prepared to go hunting.
She wants something out of it. They all want something out of it. But she's different.
The voices were getting to him, which was vaguely puzzling since every day and for as long as he could recall, the voices had always been his. But he was relatively sure that the voices he was hearing now were not actually his own. The Joker turned his head on his pillow.
Keep it down out there! Some of us have to go to work in the morning!
You're too kind.
Whether the appreciative audience was one of the simpleton guards or another of his comrades-in-arms down the hall, Joker wasn't certain. The cell was dark. The lights went off at 9 p.m. rain or shine. Didn't matter what you might be doing at the time. And no illumination leaked through the door, but he guessed it had to be near midnight. Once, way back when, after that damned winged rodent, that honestly the most unappreciative audience ever, had captured him, he'd been put in a cell with a window. The window had been barred, of course, but at least at night he could see the stars, and when he stood on the commode he could look down at the grounds. And whenever he had slipped while on the commode, his foot had gotten stuck in the toilet, and that had been funny. Really funny. Toilet jokes were always funny, after all. Then he had pushed Dr. Nybakin's head through the bars in an attempt to remove his ears, to sort of, peel them off. It had worked, but the doctor's skull had been crushed as a result, which was actually doubly funny, and worth it. The look on the guard's face when he came in that time and saw the doctor just dangling there, death rattle and all, limbs jerking around all crazy like that. Then the guard had turned and seen him sitting there on his cot, looking innocent as could be. Just the Joker minding his own business. And wearing Dr. Nybakin's ears, of course.
Now that was funny.
None of the voices told the Joker to shut up. He pivoted off the bed, then did a pratfall while getting up, tripping over his own feet and taking a header into the far wall. It was still pitch black and there was no one to see it, but it was worth a laugh, and the Joker thought he pulled it off quite well.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I'll be here all week.
Springing up, he dusted himself off and went for the door. He put his hands out in front of him, thinking to settle himself against it, to feel for the seam in the center, eye-leveled, where the little sliding surveillance window was. He didn't put too much pressure on the door at all. But it swung open, and the shift took him utterly by surprise, and he did another pratfall, this one unintentional, out into the corridor.
Clumsy.
Huh? Harvey?
Joker got up quickly, then exaggeratedly dusted himself off. Harvey Dent's presence in the hall surprised him. Normally, when Harvey was in the hall, there were orderlies in hot pursuit, with cattle prods more often than not, but the hallway was otherwise empty. Joker extended an arm and slapped the larger man on the back.
Harv, old son! What the hell is going on here?
Harvey reached and removed Joker's hand as if it were coated with poison, then turned to look at him full on. Joker got his big grin out, fixing it in place. He needed it because, honestly, Harvey was crazy, and you could literally see it on his face. Back before the dawn of time, Harvey Dent had been the Gotham City DA, and then a mobster. Joker couldn't remember who it was. Marcelli, Marconi, Macaroni? Didn't matter. Had thrown a lovely bottle of perfectly good acid at him. Harvey, not being a total fool, had turned away, but the result was that half of his face, the left side, was puckered and red and purple and all greasy crinkles, even around his left eye, which bulged like someone was trying to shove it out of his head from within. The acid had even caught his hair, burning the scalp so that the only thing that grew on that side was wiry and white. Joker had no problem with that side of Harvey Dent's face. It was the other side, the one that was still handsome and charming, blue-eyed and brown-haired, with a noble brow and strong nose. That was the side he couldn't stand. Harvey Dent, or Two-Face, as Harvey preferred half the time, glared back at him.
Shouldn't there be an alarm by now?
Harvey shook his head and started down the hall.
I think I'll join you.
It was awfully quiet. The Joker couldn't help noticing that a lot of the cell doors were open and their occupants missing, and as he moved on, he checked their names. The ventriloquist was gone, probably searching for a log to carve into Scarface, the dummy gangster that was a man in his own right. So was Roman Sionis, another member of the horribly scarred brigade, who was so damn hideous he normally wore a mask made from, Joker loved this part, his mother's ebony funeral coffin, and thus went around telling everyone to call him Black Mask. Joker stopped at Pamela Isley's room, peering in, perplexed. Pam was a kick. They called her Poison Ivy, lovely girl, a kiss that could kill. But the thing was, the cell was bare. Not even her appalling fern that she kept in that old pot or the single rose that the doctors let her keep. All gone.
Harvey, where's Pam?
Come on. I need to find a coin.
Find a coin, find a coin. You know you're a broken record, Harv. Check O'Malley's desk. I heard him saying something about laundry money after I came back from my last shock therapy.
Harvey moved down the hall and stopped at the orderly's desk.
Now, shock therapy. That's a buzz, if you get my gist. I mean, it'll really make you sit up at attention. Really get you charged up for your day. Shock treatment, in fact, has to be...
Shut up!
Joker saw that now in Harvey's hand was a nice and shiny $50. It made him grin.
What was O'Malley doing with your coin?
This isn't my coin. This is a coin. It'll do.
Where's your coin?
Two-Face looked wistfully past Joker's shoulder, a look that Joker found more than a little silly.
Give it to a cop.
Oh, Harvey, you're such a kidder. You gave it to a cop? Which one?
You know Montoya? Detective Montoya?
Is he the fat slob one who smells like spam burgers and is always smoking stogies?
No, that's our partner, Bullock. I'm talking about the other one, the lady one in Major Crimes.
Joker thought, wrinkling his brow. When he wrinkled his brow, he thought perhaps he could get his forehead to touch his nose, but that didn't work. Then his brow smoothed.
Oh, yeah, her. Ooh, she's mighty fine, ain't she, Harv? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, know what I mean?
Two-Face pulled Joker in by his shirt collar, and their noses were almost touching.
You talk about her like that, I'll feed you each one of your teeth. Rectally.
Joker kissed the tip of Two-Face's nose.
Tag, you're it.
Two-Face pushed him away, then flipped the coin in his hand. Joker waited respectfully for the result.
Follow me.
Oh, of course. Just a moment.
Joker stopped just long enough at the desk to find himself a pair of scissors. He snipped the air with them experimentally, working his way down the hall and wondering what Two-Face would do when they hit the security doors. Those doors, those were always the problem in each and every escape plan. The great massive steel things that slammed shut automatically when the alarm sounded. 400 pounds apiece, if not more, and the Joker knew that personally. They'd swung shut on him on more than one occasion. He was vaguely irritated to see that the doors were in fact open.
Someone forgot to close the door.
You're an idiot.
Two-Face didn't look back. Joker tried to remember how to look wounded, failed, and contemplated burying the scissors in Two-Face's back.
Don't.
Don't what?
Don't stab me with the scissors, clown.
Joker snipped the air again, continued to follow Two-Face down the hall, then out into reception, at which point a couple of things struck him in quick succession. First, no one was working reception. No nurses, no orderlies, no security guards, no Dr. Jeremiah Arkham. Second, it wasn't simply that the asylum seemed to be empty, he was now getting the distinct impression that it was deserted. And third, and perhaps most important, the front doors were wide open.
This has to be some sort of joke.
No Man's Land. The earthquake. Gotham City totaled. Any of these ring a bell?
Joker frowned and snipped at the air again thoughtfully. He didn't like being condescended to, but the problem was that Two-Face was almost always condescending, and the Joker had the impression that if he stabbed him now, he wouldn't get the answer to his questions.
Government's called it quits on Gotham. Closed off the city. Blowing the bridges at midnight.
Something tickled at the back of Joker's brain for a moment, and he chewed his lip, trying to draw the idea out. It wasn't coming, though, so Joker turned to the nearest wall and bashed his forehead against the cinder block.
Oh yes, what Dr. Quinzel said.
Who?
Joker rubbed his forehead, trying to massage the rest of the memory free. The earthquake. Dr. Quinzel had talked about it in one of their last sessions, about how the city was a mess, how the asylum was going to be abandoned. Then, Dr. Quinzel had cried because she didn't want to leave Joker. She told him that Dr. Arkham was calling institutions all over the country, trying to get the patients placed in new facilities. But no one wanted to take them, Joker remembered. No one wanted Poison Ivy or Two-Face or Joker. He tried to get his lower lip to quiver with the memory. And now here they were. Well, at least here Joker and Two-Face were. Who cared about Poison Ivy? Or Dr. Quinzel, for that matter. Joker checked the clock on the wall over the receptionist's desk. His favorite, Betsy, wasn't there. That was a pity, because now that he had the scissors, he'd have really liked to talk with her about the way she cut her hair. The clock read 11:58. Because it was dark out, Joker felt safe in adding PM to the calculation.
Everyone with an ounce of sense has left town already. Dr. Arkham programmed the doors to open at 11:55. Figures we're all stuck in Gotham anyway, can't get off the island.
Can we?
Not unless you want an Apache gunship firing missiles down your throat, no.
Oh, pooh. Wait. You mean...
Uh-huh.
It's all ours?
You got it.
Gotham?
All of it.
Ours?
Yes.
Joker craned his neck slowly to look past Two-Face out at the barren grounds of Arkham Asylum. Beyond the fence, through the trees, down the hill, he could see where the Sprang River was flowing beneath the Schwartz Bridge. He felt his heart starting to race. All thoughts of stabbing Two-Face to death had vanished. Joker was almost afraid to ask.
And Batman?
He's staying. He has to. He's too crazy to leave. He's locked in here with us.
For a moment, Joker honestly thought he might cry with the joy of it.
The whole city to play with. Oh, no government. That means no cops. No cops. That means no law. And no law means... victims.
I'm out of here. Catch you on the flip side, clown.
Joker watched as Two-Face went down the steps, crossed the manicured lawn to the front gate, and then disappeared from view. Joker stepped out into the cold air, settling down at the top of the steps.
You know...
He spoke to no one, staring dreamily at the city.
I think I'll wait a while.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Across the river, Gordon saw the flash as the Brown Bridge exploded, the demolition charges firing in perfect sequence. Farther upriver, they heard other explosions, saw the light as the Trigate Bridge blew. The Gotham River bubbled. Each of the subway and rail tunnels suddenly imploded, water rushing to fill the space. The last electric lights winked out. Gordon let go of his wife's hand and stepped forward, then turned to face the line of people, the line of his people. From inside his jacket, he produced his shield, holding it so that they all could see.
Gotham City is gone. There's no such thing as the GCPD from here on out. But we're still police, and we're still here, so it's up to us now to make it work. It's up to us alone to keep what we have, what we value, safe. No man's land? It won't last. You know it, I know it. Eventually Washington will come to its senses. Eventually those bridges will be rebuilt. Until then, this shield, all our shields, they're only worth the person wearing them.
He pinned his badge to his shirt, feeling the heavy metal drag on the fabric.
As long as we can wear these, we'll make it.
For a moment, no one moved, and Gordon thought that he tanked it. He had never been good at public speaking. Even after 10 years of media hounds looking for sound bites, he'd never gotten it down. Then Sarah was pinning her badge to her shirt, then Pettit, then Montoya, and suddenly all of them were wearing their gold shields, all looking at him, waiting for what would happen next.
Time to protect and serve.
Gordon headed for the door off the roof, back downstairs. On the way, his eyes went to the broken bat signal, where the shattered bulb sat in dark shadow.
Oracle. Personal. Entry number 289. No Man's Land. Day 90, 10:20 Zulu. Dear Dad, after 90 days of no man's land, I have come to the following conclusion. Anarchy is mankind's natural state. I don't think even the most jaded social anthropologist could have anticipated how quickly it would happen, how quickly the tribes would form. Within 1 week of Black Monday, the day the bridges blew and NML began, this block alone, where I now write, changed hands 3 times. Gangs that came and went so quickly I don't even remember their names. Since then, it's settled down somewhat, as I understand it has all across the city. As of this moment, I think I live in Street Demons territory, but I can't be sure. Either them or the Low Boys. The difference is academic, because aside from their tags and colors, their rule is pretty much the same. They tromp along the streets, demanding that everyone they see give them either food or goods in exchange for their so-called protection. That's about as evolved as they've gotten. They've yet to truly discover the entrepreneurial spirit, unlike many of their compatriots throughout the city. Ah, yes, their compatriots. Gotham's own rogues gallery. God knows how it happened, but someone let them out of Arkham sometime during that first week. So, in addition to the poor, the disenfranchised, and the stubborn, we've got the lunatics roaming the streets. I've been trying to keep tabs on them. Which I suppose begs the question, how exactly am I doing that? I haven't been outside of the clock tower in months now, through no fault of my own. The elevators are of course shut down, and though I like to think I'm in excellent shape, there's no way I'm gonna get myself and the chair down 20 floors and then back up again. And even if I were to make it to the lobby, then what? Wheelchairs and broken asphalt don't exactly mix, especially when you add fallen masonry to the equation. Answer is, I've got people loyal to me. Some of them I had before the quake, agents on the ground who run errands and gather intelligence. Oracle's eyes, I've taken to calling them. Right now I've got 8 of them, all outfitted with 2-way radios, maps of the city, and emergency rations. They report to me daily, either in person or via radio. And they trust me, and I trust them. If I need anything, they're who I turn to. There's one agent, though, She's something else. Can't be older than 16 for day. Pretty young woman, Eurasian, very smart, and functionally mute, in that she seems incapable of using language. I've gone through all my resources trying to determine if there is a language or code she might know, but it's gotten us nowhere. And she has been singularly unhelpful in aiding me, offering only the odd grunt and groan and whistle. No words at all. I don't know if it's a psychological or physiological trauma, but I'm beginning to suspect she was never taught to speak or read or write. I've been working with her a couple times a week, trying to teach her some basic verbal skills, but it's slow going. She's been unable to give me her name, though whether that's because she doesn't have one, doesn't know it, or doesn't like it, I've no clue. If it's all right with you, I'm going to call you Cassandra. Communications difficulties with her notwithstanding, Cassandra has become, in the last couple months, one of my most reliable people. She's fast and strong and very sneaky, and to top it all off, she's fairly imaginative, so that her reports end up being a somewhat entertaining game of charades, aided by scraps of paper and pencils. She's a horrible artist, but I understand her concepts more often than not, so we're getting by. She was in here this morning. She's actually the only one I've let into the control room. Reported that she had been in Tri-Corner, and I asked if she'd seen you. Showed her that picture of us from when I graduated GSU, and she nodded and smiled. Reported that she'd seen you yelling at some of your men. That's him, all right. I suppose you know this already, too, but Cassandra tells me that the people in your territory don't refer to you all as the GCPD anymore. Now you're the Blue Boys, with a tag and everything. I have to say, the thought of you spray painting the side of a building with your gang's tag, that made me laugh aloud. I now have a working map. Aside from where I am in Old Gotham, which, as I've already explained, changes hands depending on the day of the week, I've been able to locate some others. Two-Face is confirmed at City Hall, either residing there or in the Criminal Courts building. It makes a strange kind of sense that he would head there. By all accounts, his numbers are small, and he seems to be behaving himself thus far. Scarface and the ventriloquist have set up shop somewhere on the west side, below the Meat District. Scarface has anywhere between 5 and 15 enforcers, all of whom are armed. He's had work gangs clearing rubble since day 22, looking to salvage anything he can. I suspect he's mostly after food and equipment, those essentials that we all need to survive and that are all in short supply. Black Mask is proving harder to locate. From what little I've been able to learn, he's wandering the city, gathering people to him. To what end? I don't know. Unlike the others thus far, he seems to have no fixed territory to speak of, and no interest in claiming any either. I can't tell if he's just gone all the way around the bend or if he's honestly searching for something. Poison Ivy has apparently disappeared into Robinson Park, that's all I know. Nobody knows where the Joker is. I suppose hoping he died in the quake is too much to ask for, so the only conclusion I can draw is that he's biding his time. Oswald Cobblepot, aka the Penguin, was out on bail pending trial for trafficking in illegal goods at the time of the quake, as you know. In the ensuing chaos, he disappeared. Now he's back, and I have to confess I think he's adapted to the no man's land faster than any of the rest of us did. He's set himself up in the remains of the Davenport Tower in, surprise, the Fashion District. From there, he's running a combination bazaar and cabaret, and apparently is the man to see if you're looking for a particular item. My agents tell me that, unlike just about everyone else in town, he will accept payment in the form of cash and/or precious objects, i.e. art, jewelry, etc. Since these things are of no value whatsoever to the rest of the NML, he's doing booming business. Why he's bothering to collect such items, I can't begin to guess. But I have a sneaking suspicion that Penguin, unlike the rest of us, knows a way out of here. One of my agents, Vanessa, has even suggested that Penguin is working an active pipeline to the rest of the world, shipping out his booty in exchange for supplies, which he can then trade for more goods and so on. Seems reasonable, but I found no evidence to prove the assertion. And while I'm talking about the criminals, I might as well bring up Huntress. I've never been sure how much you know about the newest addition to Gotham's vigilante set, but I am not a fan of hers. For the record, her real name is Helena Bertinelli, and yes, you read that right. The same Helena Bertinelli whose father was Don Franco Bertinelli, capo di tutti capi of Gotham's 5 families way back when. The same Helena Bertinelli who watched her whole family murdered before her eyes when she was 8 years old. You might think, given the similarities between what happened to her and what happened to Bruce, I'd be more inclined to cut her some slack on the vigilante front. But that's where the similarity between Huntress and Batman ends, Dad. For Helena Bertinelli, it's about vendetta. For Bruce Wayne, it's about making certain that no one ever again suffers what he went through. I've received a report stating that Huntress has confined her zone to 1 block in the Upper East Side, just away from the harbor. Not coincidentally, this is the block in which she makes her home, so I'm less inclined to believe she's discovered altruism as much as enlightened self-interest. Which brings us logically to him. 90 days and no sign. 90 days and no Batman. I've told my agents to keep an eye out, an ear open, that I want to know the moment there's the faintest whisper that he's on the move. He's got to be here, I know it. But what he's waiting for, I've got no idea. He wouldn't abandon us, Dad. That's what I keep telling myself, at any rate. This morning, Vanessa called to report a new tag in Dooley Square.
I've never seen it before.
Dooley Square. On my map, that's Cosa territory. An orange tag of crossed spears?
No, not this one.
Well, whose is it?
His. It's the Bat Boss.
It had taken them a week of work to get this far, digging out the site only at night, trying to stay safe from watching eyes. The two moved rubble and dug as quietly as possible, working mostly by feel. Each of them had more cuts and scrapes on their hands than they could count, and their fingers were numb from the effort and the cold of the air and the bite of the frozen snow. The elder of the two, Paolo, was only 21. His brother Nicky was 19. When the earthquake came, the tenement they were living in, the room they shared with 2 other families, was buried under 20 tons of concrete and iron from the building next door. The bodies were never recovered. When no man's land came, Paolo and Nicky stayed more out of fear than anything else. There had been soldiers on the bridges, on the roads, in the tunnels, soldiers with guns, and both Paolo and Nicky had bad memories of soldiers with guns from their childhood in Colombia. As far as they were concerned, the soldiers meant one of 2 things. Either they'd be shot, or they'd be deported. And being deported, that amounted to being shot. So they stayed. It had to be past midnight when Nicky heard his brother Paolo speak for the first time in hours.
I found it! I found a way in, look!
Nicky moved, checking where his brother pointed. It was a clear night with half a moon, and in the light and past the shadows he could see where Paolo was indicating, a small opening, just big enough to wriggle through. And inside, the prize, a whole Jiffy Jr. convenience store, a motherlode of treasure. Canned goods, batteries, flashlights, aspirin, soda, chips, bread, cigarettes, beer.
You'll remember what we do? You go in, you grab what we can, we cover it up again, then take it to Penguin. He'll take care of us. But we don't tell him where we found it. We must keep this our secret.
I remember, of course I remember.
Keep your voice down!
Nicky frowned, then took the flashlight his brother handed him. It was their prized possession, and they had only turned it on once since they'd found it, just to make certain the batteries worked. Now, Nicky held it tightly in one hand as he got on his knees and crawled through the tiny opening.
Oh, joder.
The stink inside was awful, and almost immediately he wanted to throw up. He told himself it was spoiled milk and meat, and not a body. He told himself it didn't matter if it was a body, because the dad had it easy right now. He managed to work his way out of the hole, dropping down inside the wreckage of the store. He didn't know what he had landed in. It was entirely black inside, but for the broken circle of moonlight leaking in from above. Nicky turned on the flashlight.
Madre de Dios.
Nicky? Are you alright?
There are bodies.
Okay, ignore them. Hurry, Nicky. You don't want to be caught.
I know that. Shut up, I'm looking.
Paolo shut up. Nicky switched the flashlight on again, panning the beam carefully past the corpses, toward the fallen racks. He went for the batteries first, then for the cigarette lighters on the counter. He stuffed his pockets full of all the small things he could find, tiny tins of Imodium and aspirin, bandages, matches, whatever would fit, before switching to the backpack. Everyone needed a backpack in the no man's land. Everyone had to carry all their possessions with them. Then he went to the racks, quickly examining the cans, taking only those that were still sealed. Ravioli, soup, beans, tuna, all into the backpack. 2 cans of soda cola and another 2 cans of brew beer. He put more and more into the backpack until he was afraid the seams would split, and only then did he stop, zipping the pack as close as he could make it, then moving back to the hole.
I'm coming up!
Nicky pushed the backpack into the opening with a shove. Then he turned back, letting the flashlight track one last time through the store. He switched it off, but the image stayed. The crushed body still lit in his mind.
Ave Maria, Madre de Dios.
It wasn't Paolo waiting for him when he came out. It was someone else, a big man, bald, and behind him were 3 others, one of them already going through the backpack. The other 2 holding Paolo by the arms. In the moonlight, Nicky could see where his brother was bleeding at the mouth, and it made his stomach shrink. Then the big man was pulling him to his feet and showing him the pointed end of a machete.
This is Demon's territory. You just been caught stealing. I should cut off your hands, that's what I should do.
It's not stealing.
The big man shoved him back with his free hand.
Empty your pockets. Let's see what you brought us.
Nicky glanced at his brother, saw Paolo's jaw clenched tight, more rage than fear in his eyes. It crept into Nicky as well.
No, it's ours.
The man looked at Nicky, surprised at the defiance.
You just broke Demon's law, kid.
Nicky realized that he was going to die and started another prayer in his mind. He watched the machete blade go up, the moonlight catching its edge, and watched it start to fall. Then the blade was gone, and the man was holding his hand where it was now bleeding. Nicky heard another sound, turned his head toward it, and saw the shape. And his heart stopped for a second, because he knew what it was. He had never seen it before, no one he knew had, and some people had even told him it was a lie made up by the police to scare the criminals. But Nicky had always known it was true, and he knew what it was. So did the big man. The shape moved, passing Nicky faster than a shadow hit by light. And the big man fell backward. The shape spoke.
Leave them alone!
And Nicky thought there was something wrong then, because he'd never imagined the voice would sound like that. The big man tried to get up, and the shape moved again. And then the shape had grabbed him by the shirt, was turning, and the big man was stumbling away, while the others stood stunned. Even Paolo looked stunned, but Paolo had never believed. The shape kept moving. Another rustle of shadow, and the gang member who had taken the backpack dropped it, spilling the contents all on the ground. The other street demons who had been holding Paolo moved forward, trying to attack, but Nicky knew. You cannot attack a shadow.
Hell with this!
The shape pivoted, and the last of the demons had already fled.
Batman.
Nicky tried to find his voice, to tell his brother no, not Batman. At least, not like they were told. But the shape was already crouching at the backpack, replacing the spilled cans, then offering the bag to Nicky. When the arms moved, the cape billowed back, and Nicky saw the shape in the shadow, the yellow outline of the bat on the black chest. A woman's chest. Except for her eyes, the woman's face was covered entirely by her mask, filtering her voice somewhat. Nicky took the bag, staring.
Are you all right?
Tricorner is held by the GCPD. You'll be safer there.
Then the woman raised an arm. It was as if the Batwoman were flying away. And she was gone, just like that. After a time, Nicky looked back to his brother, saw that Paolo was still staring up at the sky where the woman had disappeared. Then Paolo lowered his eyes, and Nikki saw the understanding there, the awe. Without another word, the boys began heading south toward Tricorner. It began to snow. The snow had started falling sometime the previous night, and by morning had accumulated enough that Renee Montoya was afraid of slipping as she made her way from Blue Boy Blockade on Kelso Avenue Tricorner, south down Bonifay. It was the third snow in less than a week, and it made her scowl, made her think the Almighty was playing games with Gotham in general, and her in particular.
Middle of March and it's still snowing.
It wasn't helping her mood. She moved forward into the blast of condensation she had created, trying to figure out what it all meant. The gnawing in her gut, she knew what it was. It was worry. Trying to articulate it, that was harder. It had happened that morning when she had been checking posts on the east edge of their territory, along Cooper. Essen and Gordon had joined her on the rounds, just making certain everyone had everything they needed. One of the nearly 50 patrol cops who had remained, a young guy named De Philippus, had caught up to them outside of a ruined music store. He'd been obviously excited, almost jumping up and down.
Sir, I've got something to show you. It's over here on the roof. Follow me.
So they had all followed, Gordon's brow furrowed in a mixture of amusement and curiosity. De Philippus had flown up the stairs, was already on the roof when they stepped out into the light snow. The building had been some sort of insurance office, brick and old, and relatively solid. From the roof there was a nice view of Tricorner, even with the weather.
Well,
with a flourish, De Philippus yanked back the tarp, concealing a small heap of metal in the center of the roof, maybe 4 feet in diameter, a makeshift searchlight. And over the cracked lens, cobbled together from scraps of broken metal, the unmistakable shape of the bat.
I'll be damned.
Montoya recognized what it was instantly and began to grin. Unlike most of the GCPD, she had seen the Batman up close, knew that he was real. She understood what the young cop was trying to do, and she understood exactly why it mattered. She hadn't been out of the academy a week before she'd snuck up to the roof of Central to see the real bat signal, just to prove to herself it was there, that when things got really bad, it would burn in the sky.
Wait till you see this.
And the light had come on. In daylight, it wasn't much to see, but that didn't matter at all, really. The light glowed pale and weak, but come the night, everyone looking would be able to see it.
I used a low-voltage quartz bulb and then some car batteries that still had charge, mounted the whole thing on a steering mechanism, and then routed it through this switch and...
No.
The tone in Gordon's voice had frozen Montoya in place. Essen had given her husband a look of almost anger, but before she could speak, the commissioner had moved forward 2 long, quick strides and was nearly on top of the light. Then, he'd raised his foot and turned the lens into 1,000 shards. The bulb went out. Montoya was utterly stunned. Gordon turned and leveled his gaze at De Philippus, whose mouth was still open.
We don't need this. We don't need it because he's not coming. Do you understand that, Officer De Philippus? He's not coming.
De Philippus was speechless, then drew himself to attention.
Yes, sir. I understand, sir.
Good.
Commissioner, how do you know that?
He'd have been here by now.
But maybe he hasn't shown up because we haven't called.
Gordon looked at her sadly, pushing his glasses back up the bridge of his nose. Essen's mouth formed a tight line as she focused on her husband. Montoya could see the disapproval in her look.
No, Renee. He gave up on Gotham like everyone else. He took the easy way out.
Montoya looked at Essen for help, but Sarah, almost imperceptibly, shook her head. Don't, the look had said. It's not worth it. And Renee realized that Essen had had this conversation with her husband before.
But wouldn't it be a good idea to make people think he was around at least?
Why bother? Why raise false hope?
Gordon stepped back, making certain he could address all of them, De Philippus included.
We have to make our way through this without him. No more myths and legends. This time it's up to us. This time, it's the GCPD that puts the fear into the criminals. We're taking back Gotham. Us. Understood?
Yes, sir.
And he headed back for the stairs, with Philippus following him. Montoya moved next to Essen as they followed the men down. If Jim Gordon as commissioner was her boss, then Sarah Essen as the Major Crimes Unit shift commander was her leader, and Renee Montoya trusted the lieutenant implicitly.
Why is he so upset about Batman?
Careful about that. It's gotten so you can't even say the name in his presence.
I thought they were friends.
Essen stopped on the stairs, looking at Montoya.
They were.
And?
Essen checked the stairs, making sure her husband was out of earshot.
And it's been 3 months, Renee. No Batman. Jim's not unreasonably feeling abandoned.
Maybe there's a reason, you know?
Does it matter? The damage is done. Friends have to trust one another, don't they? And Jim doesn't trust him anymore.
Are you coming or what?
Be right down!
Essen smiled sympathetically at Montoya.
Do you think he's right? Do you think Batman is really gone?
If he's not, I don't envy the person who gets to break the news to Jim.
That was the thing, Montoya thought now. That was the thing of it all. The Batman had betrayed their trust. She hadn't really considered that he was gone until that moment on the roof, when Gordon had said the words. Her experiences with the Batman had been limited at best. She'd seen him a handful of times at crime scenes, a shadow that spoke to the officer in charge and then vanished. Once, he'd even spoken directly to her, asked if a ballistics report had come back. Given that, it wasn't unusual for her to go months without seeing a sign of him. But if the commissioner hadn't seen him either, well, that meant something else. She tried to imagine what it would be like to call the Batman your friend. She couldn't. No wonder Gordon felt betrayed. She dug her hands deeper into the pockets of her parka. She kept her head down, watching her footing as she picked her way through the rubble-strewn street. A fire was burning in a metal garbage can on the corner. A small group huddled around it, and Montoya exchanged a thin smile with them, counting her blessings.
Hey, stay warm.
That's the idea.
She at least had good winter clothes to keep her warm, and she knew that, in the grand scheme of no man's land, she could count herself lucky on that front. Since the beginning of the month, day 62, she had personally seen the bodies of 11 people claimed by the cold. But the Blue Boys, she hated that name, had been lucky. Outfitting themselves with what was left of the GCPD stores, settling in Tri-Corner, they'd started out the NML ahead of the game. Clothes, food, shelter, even ammunition. While none of those things were abundant, at least in the Blue Boy neck of the woods, all were available. Elsewhere on the island, she knew, others weren't as lucky. Not for the first time, she thanked God that her parents and brother had made it out before the bridges had been blown.
Speak of the devil, boys.
Harvey Bullock was waiting for her outside the house, talking with the 2 men on duty. Each of the guards was dressed in damaged riot gear, the dark navy fabric of the GCPD torn and peeling in places on the armor, showing the hardened plastic and Kevlar beneath. Each held a shotgun casually in their hands. Montoya wondered if the shotguns were loaded. Her own sidearm was empty, had been now for weeks, and Pettit was diligent in rationing ammunition. According to the QRT leader, bullets were now worth their weight in gold. Bullock pulled the stick he'd been gnawing on from his mouth. He was long past the nicotine withdrawal stage of his stogie habit, she knew that, and suspected he sucked on the surrogate cigars more to maintain his image than anything else. He turned his head and spat out a sliver of wood.
Howdy, Pod.
Howdy. I'm late?
Harvey shrugged, a gesture that had become more pronounced with the 20-odd pounds he'd lost since the start of the NML. The weight loss, not unexpected, had still been sudden enough that his skin had yet to catch up. Beneath the now baggy clothes, she thought he looked more like a bloodhound than ever before.
Waiting on you. How's the Kelso blockade?
Fine. Some street demons formed up at the end of the opposite block last night, but nothing came of it. Shall we?
Ladies first.
She grinned at that because it was so far from the truth. For as long as she'd partnered with Harvey Bullock, gender had never been an issue. Harvey had only cared that she could do the job. Once she'd proven that, he'd made it plain that they were equals. He held the door for her as she went into the house, felt the slight change of temperature against her face.